Why Laces? By John Gollum, the Glove Doctor. I sell thousands of leather laces specialized for baseball and softball gloves and mitts. The leather lace has become essential to the construction and utility of the mitt and glove. Specially tanned leather laces offer unique qualities, flexibility and durability. There are thousands of different mitt and glove designs, configurations and patterns. Why laces? And how did they become so fundamental to gloves and mitt design? Through the years, one of my best customers has been the New York Yankees. If that wasn't enough, in 2000 I had the pleasure of collaborating with one of the greatest Yankees of all time, Yogi Berra. But first, let me give some context to what was happening at this time. Yogi and former Yankees owner George Steinbrenner had just mended a long-held feud stemming from when in 1984 Steinbrenner fired Berra as manager, following a 16-game period when the Yankees had a poor start to the season. Fast forward to 15 years later. It's 1999 and the Yankees were on top of the baseball world, having won several world championships. Steinbrenner was feeling quite magnanimous about things. He apologized to Yogi and asked if he would return to the organization. Yogi, having been absent from old-timers games and other Yankee alumni events, was still very popular and sorely missed by the Yankee fandom. Around the same time, a small museum, the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center, was dedicated on the campus of Montclair State University in Berra's hometown of Montclair, New Jersey. I had been one of the first exhibitors, curating a comprehensive interactive exhibit on the history of the baseball glove. The exhibit, called Glove Odyssey, The History of the Baseball Glove, was a major success and drew a lot of attention to the newly minted museum. It was there, it would turn out, that Yogi and I shared a particular love of gloves. When Steinbrenner brought Berra back to the Yankees, they gave him the new role as coach-instructor for the catchers. In a flurry of highly publicized articles surrounding Berra's Yankee homecoming, there was an article in the New York Times where I was directly involved. Berra, a 3-time most valuable player and 10-time world champion, was best known for his timely clutch hitting, but had to work hard to become one of the game's best catchers. Berra had a nuanced and uniquely intelligent winning way of handling the pitching staff. Little attention was given to Berra's catcher's mitt though. But, for Berra, the mitt was an extremely important tool. For the major part of his early playing years, Berra used Rawlings Pro model mitts. He was a long-time endorser of Spalding gloves and mitts, which at the time were manufactured by Rawlings. In those days, a new mitt was stiff and had to be broken in. Berra carefully and skillfully pounded, oiled and softened his mitt into his desired precise shape and feel. Like many catchers of this time, he altered and fashioned his own unique web for his mitt. The web resembled a kind of spider web that he designed with leather rawhide laces, replacing the typical solid leather web. This mitt with the special web was the one he used to catch Don Larsen's perfect World Series game in 1956. The glove was bronzed and displayed prominently in his museum. Now as the catcher's coach for the Yankees in the early aughts of the new century, Yogi thought that if catcher Jorge Posada's mitt had a similar web to the kind that made him a great catcher, it may improve Posada's skills. Here's where I came in. After bonding with Yogi at the opening of the show I curated at his museum, Yogi asked me to convert Posada's mitt with his kind of spider web design. I did, and it became one of the main elements of interest in the New York Times article. On Baseball, a Lesson in Bronze for a Golden Catcher, May 11, 2000. Baseball is an old American game beginning in the American colonies before the founding of the nation, deriving from the English game rounders or town ball. It was played with no gloves at all. For much of the early town ball/rounders years the game was played with varied rules from town to town. The pitcher threw a leather ball stuffed with feathers or similar materials like cotton or wool underhand. The ball was not standardized and varied greatly depending on who made or provided it. It was relatively softer than the standard ball of today and didn't crack off the bat but was more like a thud. And no matter how hard it was hit, it couldn't carry the hundreds of feet professional ball players routinely send it today. The ball was used over and over again pretty much until the stuffing came out of it. It would become lopsided and softer as the game progressed. Early rules included that a putout could be made on a single bounce as well as on a fly. Although not exclusive, catching the ball was generally not terribly hard on a bare-handed fielder. In the decade prior to the Civil War, a league of baseball teams played within the New York metro area. It was here that much of the rules for the game were standardized, then known as the New York style. Principal to the game was the change to pitching, which allowed the pitcher to now throw overhand as it is done today. The field of play with its bases and pitcher's mound distances were made consistent. In the years just after the war, the National Association of Baseball Players was formed, establishing professionalism for the players. Lured away from the Philadelphia club in 1868, 22-year-old Douglas Allison, a catcher, was paid by the Cincinnati Red Stockings to handle their lightning hard-throwing ace pitcher Asa Brainerd. Widely agreed the Red Stockings Baseball Club was the first team to pay their players, making the Reds the first professional baseball team. Seminal to the game, Allison devised a new style of catching, which would change everything. Prior to him, catchers would position themselves as much as 20 feet behind home plate and scores were commonly 50 to 60 runs. Catchers routinely allowed the ball to bounce once or twice in front of them in order to handle the ball. Allison moved up to within several feet of the plate, electing to catch the ball without the bounce. Allison's new technique cut down significantly on high run tallies, keeping the ball in front of him, cutting down base runners' steals and passed balls. However, the catching was hard on his hands. Allison, who had worked briefly as a stone cutter, began to use the same kind of glove he used as a stone cutter, to catch pitches to protect his hands. It wasn't long before catchers in the league began to mimic Allison. Some of the catchers would stuff grass or even raw meat in the gloves as additional padding protection. While Allison received credit for the first use of gloves, it would turn out that the St. Louis team outfielder, Charlie White, was the first to use a glove in the field. White used a kid glove which matched the color of his skin to camouflage it, since the use of gloves was frowned on. Albert Spalding, a fine pitcher in his day playing for the Boston club, took notice and when he moved to first base, began to adopt the glove. Spalding, ever the promoter, ceased the game's popularity and opened a store with his brothers in 1885, where he introduced the new catcher's gloves in his store sold as a pair, for both hands. Less clear was how the introduction of the pillow-type mitt came about in the 1880s. Accounts point to New York Giant catcher Buck Ewing. This heavily padding design is still the basis of catcher's mitts today. At the same time, fielding got considerably better and batting averages plummeted. These early gloves were not designed with any lacing. The earliest modifications to gloves consisted of different amounts of padding in various locations to reduce the sting of the ball on the user's palm. The padding was permanently sewn into the glove. When a web, a flap between the thumb and index finger, was introduced at the turn of the 20th century, it was solidly sewn in. It wasn't long before players wanted to make adjustments to better customize their gloves and mitts to their particular desires and needs. Glove manufacturers' first innovation was to introduce tiny buckles to the web so the length of the leather could be adjusted. Players wanted to be able to regulate and redistribute the padding in the palm and fingers so they would open the heel, pull out the padding, and add more as desired. The manufacturers introduced the first lace in the glove at the heel so that users could now open and close the glove when needed without damaging the integrity of the glove. The heel lace feature remains in all gloves today. The great Hall of Famer Hannes Wagner didn't like having any leather between his palm, citing it would interfere with his fielding, so he cut a hole in the palm of his glove. Durable leather rawhide lace was a staple in the leather manufacturing for shoes, holsters, and saddles. The natural strength and functionality soon found its way into the major design factor. Until the end of the dead ball era prior to World War I and the Chicago White Sox gambling scandal, fielders' gloves were made with lightweight soft kid skins and horse hides, typical for any kind of glove. They were not very durable. Uniform manufacturers added a pocket specially to store a glove when players were not fielding. Interestingly enough, it wasn't until the 1970s that batters used specialized gloves for hitting. Today no batter is bare-handed. There are special gloves for sliding as well. By the time Babe Ruth came along, gloves were well established. And at that point, catcher's mitts and the fielder's glove were beginning to be made from cowhide. Although a bit stiff at first, when the leather softened during the break-in period, it made the glove and mitts more durable and desirable. Not long after, more elaborate designed webs were introduced incorporating leather lace that could be adjusted and altered to the player's desires and needs. Then the Rawlings Company of St. Louis introduced a cowhide glove that would revolutionize gloves forever because cowhide was more rigid than kid and horsehide used previously. The new Rawlings Fielder's Bill Doak model was constructed somewhat larger, extending the thumb and fingers in length. The extended thumb allowed for more space between the index finger. A larger web was inserted which created a substantially deeper pocket. Even more significant, Hall of Famer Hank Greenberg, assisting the glove designers at Rawlings, created a revolutionary design change to the first baseman's mitt. The new mitt would eventually be named the Trapper and would become the state-of-the-art and the model for all basemen's mitts. The Trapper mitt allowed the first baseman to snare throws one-handed, increasing the player's fielding abilities, increasing putouts, and significantly reducing errors. As a boomer growing up in the 1950s and 1960s, my coaches insisted I catch two-handed. They grew up and played ball before World War II. The gloves they used were small and designed for catching in the palm. Two hands were always needed. Any buckles used to adjust and fasten straps or webs disappeared from all gloves since the metal to make them had been diverted for the war effort. Glove makers used a lace in place of them. Rawlings would follow up their Trapper baseman's mitt with the Playmaker Fielder's Glove, which increased the deep pocket to greatly assist a fielder's ability to catch one-handed. Gloves with longer fingers needed to have a lace run through the tips to keep the ball in the pocket. Wilson's A2000 design, conceived in the mid-1950s, would become the template for all gloves to this day. Glove designs relied on laces which gave the glove greater flexibility and adjustability. Generally, your glove or mitt, whether it is a fielder's glove, a baseman's or catcher's mitt, is based on original designs that were devised more than 150 years ago. The fielder's glove is basically a glove with 5 fingers, the first baseman's mitt is a clam or claw, and the catcher's mitt is the round pillow. No telling what gloves or mitts will be or look like in the coming years, but for the time being, play ball.